So again, welcome everyone. Welcome, Nicole. I'm so excited to have you here.
Same, absolute same. And it's wonderful to see all of you from so many places. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's always fun to see where everyone's joining from. So Nicole, I just finished your book a few days ago. I mentioned this while we were talking before, but I listened to the audio version and it was accompanying me on my move that I just did. And I got so engrossed in it. And I don't know if I should admit this, but I don't usually love memoirs. It's not really like a genre that I love. But oh my gosh, I was so engrossed in your story, and you are just the most beautiful writer. And I was like hanging on every word, and just, I mean, it is such a beautiful book. And the care that you put into it and the thought really comes through. So thank you for creating this.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it's almost 9 hours, so it's a big commitment to ask people to to give 9 hours of their time to listen. Thank you.
It honestly didn't feel long. Like I said, it was just so engaging, and yeah, the parts about your life and the story that you share is just really beautiful. You're so talented. It was just beautiful. So I'm really excited to talk to you about your book a bit more. So before we dive into that, I'll do a little bio for those who don't know you. So Nicole Louie is a writer and translator who's based in Ireland. She's a former content strategist and creative writer for virtual assistants and holds a BA in advertising and graduate diplomas in literature and translation. And when she's not writing, she's reading about the lives of women without children. Her essays have appeared in O Reader and Childfree magazine, and she has a curated collection of books, movies, and podcasts about women who are not mothers by choice, infertility, circumstance, or ambivalence that you can find on her website. And her book that we're going to be discussing today is Others Like Me. And I'm just so excited to kind of dive into this discussion with you because I have so many questions about the book and kind of what inspired it. And so let's just start there. So, what did inspire you to write Others Like Me?
Um, Big question. Short version is in my late 20s, I was already quite certain that I didn't want to become a mother. And I was in a relationship, very loving relationship with someone who at some point started feeling like he wanted to become a father. And that was what basically started creating a fork in my life. I I knew I didn't want to become a mother, but I felt that it was very important to understand why. And also, I was having a very hard time visualizing that life. I thought I do want to go there, but I don't know what there looks like. And not having someone to talk to me about that made me engage in a lot of agony and fear. And I thought, is it justified? Is it just fear of the unknown, or is really not having a child like such a bad thing? Like, what is bad about it? What is going to happen? Why am I so afraid if I don't even know what is there? Why am I so afraid of going there? Although I do want to go there. So it was all these very complicated feelings. And I thought maybe I'll talk to someone who can tell me what it's like to be in that place. And at the time, I couldn't find someone to talk to. So I started reading books about it instead, and which is why I have this huge collection of books and, and movies and documentaries and also art pieces. It was my way, I guess, to connect with other women um, until I realized to try and actually find them in real life and ask them questions. And when I started interviewing them, I realized I want to share those conversations, so I will write a book.
Yeah, well, it's such a beautiful collection, and I think that part in the book was really striking, where it was kind of early on where you talk about how, you're wondering like where are these stories of childless women or child-free women, and then doing some research and Googling like authors and finding out that some of your favorite authors didn't have kids,
Yes,
and then starting there from that place because I think one of the things that makes it feel like it's so hard to find and connect with one another is that we don't often recognize that there are people without kids in our lives, our coworkers, friends, family, people
yes,
around us in our, churches, workplace, wherever it is, communities. Um, favorite authors, favorite actors, all those things, but we don't often think about it through that lens. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, when I think about it, actually, I have an aunt who didn't have kids, but I don't know why, and I've never talked to her about it. So it's interesting that it feels so invisible, but there are quite a few of us. So
Yeah, it's the lack of the conversation with them about it that makes us think that they are not in that situation. And for me, it's like I mean, you guys can see this is my writing room, and
it's
this is
beautiful.
thank you. This is some of my favorite authors, and most of them were already my favorite authors 14 years ago when I started the book. So they were all there. And
So cool.
there is this passage in the book where I say they were all there, this army of goddesses on my shelf. This was just that realization that they were already goddesses to me then, but I never
Yeah.
had thought about them through the lenses of not being mothers. So
Well, I love that. So your book features, quite a few profiles of people that you interviewed and talked with to include their stories in your book. And I'm just wondering, as you were kind of planning your book and organizing the interviews, were there specific like experiences or perspectives or identities that you knew you wanted to make sure that you included, or was it kind of like just finding who you could? Like, how did you approach the stories that you included?
when I started, it was mostly around whoever I can find. Like when you have nothing, anything is a gift. So every conversation, I lived in Sweden at the time. I'm originally from Brazil. So there was that level of already being distant from your language and from your homeland. So finding somebody to talk to, like Lucy, who was the first person I interviewed, who became a dear friend of mine, finding her there in the south of Sweden and having that conversation with her on my red couch already felt like such a gift. And then it was a matter of, Lucy, do you know somebody else? And then going and finding those other women. I would say that somewhere between maybe interview 3 and 4, I started thinking it would be good to find people who speak other languages, who have different religious beliefs, because I also understood coming from a very Catholic country and suddenly living in a place that was secular like Sweden is, that carries such a weight in how women are raised, and our sense of options and identity can be very heavily informed by religions. And I thought what it would be like to talk to somebody who believe in other things or who doesn't believe in certain things. So anthropologically, I started getting very curious about that. Like, will it bring different experiences, different conversations? So I started being a bit more, I wouldn't say open because I was always open, but I think I was being a bit more selective. So maybe not another person from Sweden, maybe
Mhm.
find a person from Denmark or from Norway, start going further. And then after that, I interviewed quite a few women who were child free in the beginning. I definitely started from a sense of wanting to validate my experience and to find somebody who had also chosen. But then I met someone, Kay, who is visually impaired, lives in Canada. And at some point in her interview, she will say, I'm both child free and childless. And I went, oh, how come? Like, tell me more. And she said, well, I am blind, but it's not my blindness that is stopping me from having a child. And then, okay, tell me more. And she goes, well, I'm fertile. I could have a child. It is within my circumstance. I'm making the decision not to have a child. And that expansion of a way of thinking made me interested also in what other nuances are there that I haven't thought about? It's not my reality, but I want to hear about them. And then after that, I really didn't ask women anymore why they didn't have children before interviewing them. It was just, if you don't have a child, it's enough for me to be interested in you. And I am very eager to hear your story already within the context of the interview. And
Mhm.
then after that, it was just a ball of surprises, really. I never really knew where the interviews were going to go. And I think the biggest learnings came exactly from those interviews because I didn't have a set way of thinking about any of them. And I was no longer just trying to validate my experience. I was just really trying to hear and learn from their sense of self. So it was mostly that. I think different nationalities, different ways of thinking, and also being in different spectrums in the childlessness spectrum was important for me. Later on, almost at the end, I was specifically finding women who were ambivalent, who were still choosing, because I thought I heard from women who chose. I heard from women who can't have for many reasons, including fertility, but not just infertility. Now I want to hear from somebody who is still in the process of making the decision. I want to hear that yes and no. And then that was kind of the end of the research. I felt like as much as I could, I tried to cover a sample that would kind of show us that we're not all the same.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the real strengths of the book. I was pleasantly surprised at how many different countries were represented from where your
14.
people you interviewed were from. And so it was really interesting because I think, like you said, cultural expectations, religious expectations, like there's so many different things that influence our decisions or how we view becoming a mother or not. I know, for me, I grew up Mormon, which is like a very conservative
Mm.
Christian religion. And even though I wasn't Mormon, when I realized that I wouldn't be able to have kids, some of some of the messages that I had heard growing up, we were just so ingrained in how I was viewing myself and like really impacting my sense of worth and what I thought my purpose was. And I found so much of those like early messages from my childhood, like coming up in therapy as I was trying to unpack everything and realizing like, wow, I don't even like believe in this anymore. I'm not Mormon anymore. But these like messages I got all growing up about who I'm supposed to be and what like my worth is in this world are like really in there. And I know, it's not just religion. Like I think there's other messages that we get from people about women's worth being tied to motherhood. But anyway, just I love that you included so many different perspectives and because all of those things really do have such a big influence on how we view this idea of motherhood and non-motherhood. So
It does, and it can take us a long time for most of us, if ever, to remove all those layers, like an onion. Really, like we were taught this religiously, we were taught this at school. Maybe our parents confirmed certain aspects, and then by the time we are in our 20s or 30s, who are we underneath all of those voices, all of those layers? How much of the one thing is real one thing? How much of the one thing is fear of not having? How much of the one thing is truly wanting to have that experience? It can take quite a while for us, I think, to figure it out, learn to listen to our own voice, and to actually believe that voice is there. Because, like I said, I knew I didn't want to become a mother, but still, I had to go to this journey for 14 years to kind of make peace with my decision, which in a way is like it's crazy. It shouldn't have to take me this long, this amount of work to then just go, ah, actually, I was right 14 years ago. But so much of it
yeah.
is just external noise.
Yes. And I think that I think part of it is that representation piece that you captured really well in your book of if you don't have examples of what it looks like and you haven't, like, I don't know, I feel like we all know some of the perspectives of motherhood and we hear from moms about what their life is like and we see those as examples and we have kind of a grasp of what that might be like. But yeah, I think it's a lot harder we're not really taught to like envision ourselves as non-moms. Yeah.
Yes.
So we touched on this a little bit, but one thing that I think is really surprising to me still, but I mean, I understand some of the reasons for it, but I still get surprised is that if you look at the statistics that around 1 in 5 women will never have kids, that's not that small of a group. I mean, it's not the majority, but that's like quite a few people. Why do we still feel so alone in our experience when our numbers aren't that tiny? Like, why is it so hard to make these connections?
Because unless you are in community like your community, you will probably not have those conversations. Thinking about, like you said, we said in the beginning, you may have an aunt who has been there your entire life, who doesn't have a child. You spend Christmas together, you visit that aunt, she's around, and you never said, hey, can we talk about that? Or how do you feel about that? And this happened a lot in interviews when I would ask, is there anybody else in your life? Yeah, I have a sister, I have a godmother, I have an aunt. And then, did you talk about it? The answer was always no. Well, that's not true. There was one person who said, when I realized that I went through my second IVF, that didn't work. I felt like I needed to talk to someone. And I thought, wait a minute, I have an aunt who doesn't have children. She's in her 60s. Maybe I'll just talk to her. And then like out of that pain that she felt of not being able to have a child in that moment, she felt like maybe we can talk about it. But it was one out of 33 women who I interviewed who said, I went to talk to this person who is close to me. Everybody
Yeah.
else immediately, like there was blindness to, if we didn't talk about it, then maybe they are not in that situation. It is, that's what taboo is, right? It's right there in front of us and we don't address. That's the same with periods, with pregnancy, with sex, with different sexuality, with being divorced, with being adopted. Those are all things that people find very difficult to talk about, to talk to others about. And I'm so grateful that we live in a time where we can all be here. How many are we now? 48 people from different countries taking this 1 hour on a Sunday to say hello to each other. And I'm sure we have very different circumstances and reasons to be here. But not that long ago, a conversation like that wouldn't be possible in this scale, wouldn't be possible. And so for people who still don't have access to education or to the internet, they still are in a place where if they don't go talk to that aunt of theirs, they would not have a conversation about it probably until they die. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's why it's important. That's why it was important for me in a very small way, in a tiny contribution to put those 14 stories there. It's my way of saying go talk to others.
Yeah.
You're not alone. And you don't have to only talk to people who feel exactly the same way. You don't only have to have conversations with people who also couldn't have or also chose. Like we really can all learn from each other and support each other. We don't have to feel the same way to be supportive. I don't have to go through an infertility journey to understand that that's painful to
Yeah.
you and to hold your hand and to be your friend. Just like I don't have to have a child to support my friends who have children when they're having a hard time being moms. And putting those conversations there in first person, letting the women tell their stories in their own voice was my way of saying you too could be having those conversations. You too could be hearing those voices if you go and talk to your cousin, to your godmother, and to other people in your life. It doesn't have to be all with strangers online. Maybe they will love having that conversation with you too.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that can be really tricky is that if somebody, wanted to have kids and couldn't, it can be such a painful experience to be asked all the time, do you have kids? And I think part of it is because I think usually when you're being asked, the expectation is that you're going to say yes, and the person's looking for a way to bond. So it's like, I feel like a lot of times that happens in small talk where it's like, oh, do you have kids? How old are your kids? Let's talk about that because we can find common ground early on.
Yeah.
Um, but I think one of the things that can be really challenging is like, how do you kind of broach it in a sensitive way if you're curious, but you also want to be aware that it might be a painful topic that somebody
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
want to talk about. Do you have any
Yeah. No,
tips
yeah.
or like advice for how you kind of navigated
No,
that
I
or?
won't give any tips, but I do think um like any other sensitive topic in life, whether it's illness, unemployment, the solution of marriage, those are all tricky topics. I think there is a level of common sense that we can apply to this as well, which is how you're asking that question, why you're asking that question, and where. Are you doing this with six other people on the table while everybody's having lunch? Or are you sending an email or a letter or calling that person and saying, hey, such and such, I was I'm going through this phase where I'm thinking about having a child, or I think you should start with your story, or I tried to have a baby or I couldn't, or I'm confused about my decision. And it just occurred to me that you also don't have a child, and I'm wondering if you're open to talk about it. There are ways to not trap the person into a conversation of not just going, hey, why don't you have kids? And
Right.
then that person can that person can always go, we can talk about your story, but I'm not ready to talk about my story, or sorry, I don't really want to be involved. Like
Yeah.
you never really know, and just approach with cautiousness. be mindful, explain why. It's also not just curiosity, right? It's not like I have nothing else to do. I'm just calling to find out about your life. It's no, I'm going through something and I realized that you also don't have. I'm just wondering, is there something you want to talk about? Can I talk to you about how I feel? This is how I would approach. In my family,
Yeah,
I do not have a single woman in my family who doesn't have a child. It's very, very
yeah,
very Catholic country. Yeah, a lot of fears around growing old, which is why I also had those fears. As a country where basically you die alone in an elderly home, or you move in with your children. There isn't much mid ground, and that was another thing I noticed in Scandinavia. There are other solutions that people are thinking about different ways, like communal living is a
yeah,
big thing. You see it in Germany, you see it in the Netherlands, apartments now being built with the sense of you have your own living room and your bedroom, but maybe the kitchen is a space that you can share, or your back garden. So there are architects that are actually thinking about a different way of living should you be interested in those conditions. But in my country, it's still very much a die alone with strangers or move in with your with your children. So it
yeah,
took me a while to see other options, again, for lack of role models and lack of those conversations.
yeah. Well, one thing that I have realized is just how uh, opening up and showing a bit of like vulnerability and courage to share a little bit about yourself in certain circumstances can go a long
Mhm.
way in helping other people kind of meet you back a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, one thing that has been really interesting about having my Instagram account is that I've had people who I went to elementary school with or high school or that I knew, from 10 years ago or people or coworkers like that at my last job, I had coworkers who would say, I get messages saying like, oh my gosh, I'm going through infertility right now and I just got like one of your like reels just got recommended to me and came up on my Instagram page. They didn't know like that I knew you.
Mm.
And then I've had so many people reach out from that. And it's made me realize just how many people, even in my own personal network,
Mm.
are childless or child free. But again, I wouldn't have known except that like because I was putting myself out there. And not that everyone needs an Instagram account, but I think even in just personal conversations, like if there is that person in your life that you think might be interesting to talk to you about it that also doesn't have kids, that, instead of asking, finding a kind of casual way, maybe to kind of like bring it up and touch on it a little bit about your own experience
Yeah.
and seeing if they respond and seeing if you
Yes.
can open up a door that way.
Yeah, I think it's another great way. That happened a lot when I was working, especially my last job when I was already drafting the book. There would be a lot of conversation. What did you do on the weekend, or what did you do last night? And then I'd be like, well, actually, I'm working on this book. And then they'd be like, oh, what is the book about? And then when I would say, oh, can we talk? Can we have a coffee? Can we find a time? And I would notice very clearly when the person wanted to talk about that because they would remove themselves from that lunch group team lunch and would be like, can we have a coffee, just you and I? And I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I already kind of knew, like, oh, they want to share something. And then we would go and have that coffee. And then they would tell me a little bit more about it. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes just putting yourself out there in a level that you are comfortable, in a way that you're comfortable, and seeing how they respond can be a nice
Mhm.
way to know if there is a path there for conversation.
Yeah. Well, I just want to touch on something else that you mentioned about, even if we come from different experiences, being able to find some commonality. And one of the things that I think helped me the most in being able to like picture what a life without kids could look like was that I had always had friends who were child free by choice. And, that my whole life I have. And so when I got to a place where I couldn't have kids, I thought about all of them and like how they lived their lives and like was able to have conversations with them. And it was such a nice, I mean, in my mind, I'm like, who better to ask about like what life without kids can be like than someone who like chose that as their first option because they thought it would be like a better life. And so,
Mm.
I've been really grateful to the child free community and like the individuals that I know for being open and being able to talk about like, yeah, here's why I did choose this, and here's the things that I thought about, and here's why this was like the best option for me. And it was such a nice way to like reframe how I was thinking about not having kids and to be able to see some of the like perks and joys and like the good benefits that can come from it too, instead of just focusing on like what I when I think about like what I lost or what I wanted and can't have to kind of help to reframe some of that. Not that it takes the grief away, but it just helps me kind of identify like, oh, actually, like there's some really good stuff too. And I can lean into those things and I can like learn from the child-free people in my life. Like what are they up to? What are they doing with their lives? Like why do they
Yeah,
do this? So
this is
yeah.
great. For me, it was the other way around. For me, was I learned so much from the childless people I interviewed, so much because it really took me to places in my decision making that I wouldn't have gone had I not spent time with them. I do mention this in the book, being with Madalena, who really, really wanted a child, and in the process of doing IVF rounds, got breast cancer, and then had to choose between continuing her IVF treatment and starting treatment for cancer. It's such an impossible thing to be asked to decide, and to be sitting across from her and listening to her talk about how much she wanted to be a mom. I came home and I thought, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure you don't want to? It made me go to places that I don't know if I would have allowed myself to go. And it made me feel grateful for the choice, and it made me feel more empathetic towards those who can't, and to just not assume things about them. Because also within the childless women who I interviewed, they were very different stories. Like Madalena was an absolutely always wanted, will always want to be a mom. But then the other two women who say they are childless, it wasn't clear cut like
Yeah.
that. And then it was like, right, so there is nuance there as well. It's not just pain, it's not just the grief doesn't have to stay with you forever. They were in different journeys of their grief as well. The other two were very much, well, this already happened, but now I'm in my 60s and I decided that's not going to be what my life is going to be like. My grief is not, I don't have to carry my grief to the end, and this is how I'm dealing with it. So even just hearing that and the way she was dealing with that, I think it taught me a lot about how I can apply that to other areas in my life, because grief is grief and
Yeah.
loss is loss, and the way they were dealing with that. So yeah, a lot of learnings there as well. And Kay was very much some days I wake up and I feel child free, other days I wake up and I feel childless, and I'm like, wow. So yeah, it's those walls are imaginary, aren't they? Like we really can go from one part of the spectrum, and within this one life we can feel very different things. And that was important because this book was very much a book about stop stereotyping us. You stop thinking like we are all the same.
Yeah.
But realizing this myself within my own research was also a big surprise for me. Like I had my own way of thinking about child free and childless people, and I don't even use those words anymore. I don't have attachment for them anymore. Like there is a reason why the book is the lives of women without children and not the wives of childless women or the lives of child-free women. I wanted us all to be there for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, I think the terminology around not having kids definitely needs some updates because I feel like we have like this idea that like you're either child free and you always knew that you didn't want kids and you like never grappled with it and you're 100% happy and there's never even like a tinge of like, oh, maybe that would have been nice or like
Mm-hmm.
there's no ambivalence. It's just like didn't
Yes.
want, not even a question. And then there's like you wanted kids and you couldn't have them for whatever reason and you like you're to be pitied and your whole life is going to be only grief and
Yes.
like it's like these boxes
Yeah.
and it doesn't allow for most of our stories. Like I think, like you said, there's so much shifting and in betweens and people who have ambivalence in their story who aren't sure and who for who it is a hard decision. And it's just I don't know. I feel like we really need some language updates because right now the terminology we have doesn't even capture a tiny bit of the experience.
I think the changes within us, right? I had to choose the subtitle for my book. That was my way of not enhancing that terminology. I think how you name communities, how you name events all of this matters, and I'm not saying those words are not important to be used when you are still in a moment where you want to maybe enhance that part of your life. So there is that label comes with a sense of pride if it's being child free, because it took so much energy to finally get there, and you're like, no, I want to be child free, I want to be the person who says the word. That's fine. And if being childless is because you want to be with other people who are also going through grief, it gives you more comfort to be there for a while you're overcoming that feeling. I understand why the words I used. When I stop being trusted in the terminologies when it's imposed on others. Or the other day happened on Reddit. I was posting about an article about books about women who don't have kids, and it was just basically, hey guys, here's a list of books about women who don't have kids. And then somebody was like really upset because one of the books was a woman who had this stepchild, and then she wasn't child free because she had a step kid, and how dare that book is on the list. And I'm like, whoa, it's such a rigid way of thinking that because there's somebody in a huge it was the Guardian at the time, in a huge publication in a huge newspaper, decided to write a list of books about women who don't have kids, which is such a good intention. And then the comments were filled with people who were angry because there was this one book. I'm just going, do we really need to make it so complicated all the time? If for you in your personal life, not having a child as the child of your partner is something that you don't want, great, but why give a hard time to other people? You don't know why they fell in love. You don't know why they are together, you know? So when you're imposing the terminology, I kind of lose the interest in the conversation. I don't think we have to, I don't think we need or gain much in being that rigid.
Yeah, I agree. And I know just from my own community work that there's a lot of people who are childless not by choice who are also step parents, and for whatever reason that relationship is complicated and it doesn't they still have the grief over being childless and identify as that. And so yeah, I think that the conversations I like the idea. I like the term you used of rigid, or getting just having boxes and saying like you fit here and this is what it means to be this, and that's the end of the conversation. And I think like you said, we're at a point in history like no other time where we actually have technology that you and I can be having a conversation from across the world and have 54 people join us from across the world, and be talking about this. I don't know of any other time where this would have been possible to like have these collective conversations where we can talk about this with nuance and talk about it in community and come together and say, yeah, let's sort through all of this. What do we think about this? And like have these discussions. It's really exciting. I obviously love it since I've devoted my full time work to it now, but I just find it really fascinating. So
Well, lucky us to have you dedicating so much of your time to, it's important, and to bring the nuances is important, and to accept the nuances without feeling that they are invalidating our experience is also important. The decisions that you make in your personal life, the words that you use in your personal life, they are yours to be used, and other people will use the ones that they want to use, you know. So yeah.
yeah, I think people might be surprised that even though I run the Childless Collective, which, I named it very intentionally because I wanted it to be for like a specific group, but I don't really use childless or child free to define myself. Like I just say I don't have kids. And if somebody has questions about it, then I'll say, yeah, I wanted kids, I couldn't have them. And I might go into more detail, but I don't really like the labels for me personally, even though I put them on different things, but I try to be really intentional about how I use those. Yeah.
Same thing for me. I'm often being asked like the amount of marketing or PR people recently who were say my book is a child-free book, and I would write to them after, say, could you please change the like I had to do like four or five times already, like including big publications. Can you please change the way you were referring to my book? Nowhere in this book it says this is a book only for child-free women. And I spent 6 extra years doing research on ambivalence and childlessness. So you're effectively canceling my research and what I learned from these women. And I wanted to hear from them. There is a reason why they are in the book. Can you please? And so they would, what do you want me to say? Like, women without children. Like, that's what we are.
Yeah, yeah.
collectively, if you are referring to us, that's what I chose. If you're going to talk to them individually, they can call themselves whatever they want, but the book is not a child-free book. And they were like, okay, but then also understand these people are not spending 24 hours of their time thinking about this, researching this like you and I were. So
Right.
they also have to be, for them, maybe it's just the buzzword they heard. Maybe they think everybody says child-free. Then I'm
Yeah.
like, just use women without children. And then thankfully they've been quite responsive about it, and they're like,
That's
okay.
good.
Yeah.
Well, I have a few more questions for you, but I am curious for those of you who are in the chat and listening in. Do you have people in your life that you know that you're able to talk about being child-free or childless with? So if any of you want to just share, I'm just curious to hear what your experience has been like if you have anyone in person that you're able to talk about this with. So while those are coming in, um, so, okay, in your conversations with women without kids, did you notice any themes that seem to kind of commonly weave through our collective experience?
No.
No, they're all, I know, it's like there's so much uniqueness, right, in every story.
There is. I think the one thing that they all mentioned in their own ways, with their own point of view and emphasis was, I won't be defined by the lack of a child in my life. And there are some of them, I think Cecile, I had a quote of Cecile here for an interview I gave the other day. Guys, I have a big screen above your head, so if I'm looking, just so you know what is happening. Why Nicole is looking up. At some point, Cecile will say, "Oh, actually, give me 2 seconds because it's such a good quote." And
Yeah, take your time.
um, Cecile will say, I've never screened people on the basis of whether they have kids or not, or try to assess if they are a bad person to be my partner or my friend based on that parental status. And then earlier on, she will say, not having kids is a circumstance and an aspect of my life, but it's not my identity. It's like being atheist. It's very clear to me that I am, but I don't go around every day thinking that that's what I am. I just am. And I don't go around proclaiming myself one way or another to every person I meet. So Cecile was one of the most assertive women in the book. She was just very much like, I live my life the way I want to. And within all that certainty and assertiveness, she was also, if I wake up tomorrow and want a kid, then I'll try to have that kid. So there was so much nuance there because she could be so strict and rigid within her assertiveness. Or this is what I was thinking, but then later in the interview, she goes, "Oh, but if I want a kid, I'll go get a kid." Not as in like a magic kid that is somewhere for her to get, but it was just that sense. She didn't feel like she had to be certain until she dies. That's how she feels today, which is why she's in the ambivalent part of the book. So there was that sense of, that doesn't define, this is just one part of me, and I don't have to feel sad every day or to just be too bubbly about it and tell everybody that as if this is the one thing about me that they should know. And when I think about just like the amount of experiences that they go after, like from the kind of careers that they are pursuing, which are various, or making a lot of time for hobbies and passion. We have Borchak, who spent so much of her time outdoors climbing mountains, like big mountains like the Everest. But she's also she's also an academic who teaches at university. So there's very different two ways of living. Then you have people who are taking care of elderly, like Nanette, who is in her 60s, is a full-time elderly carer. You have Doreen, who is from Ghana, who studied peace studies. It's a very specific way of making the world better. So from people who have very ordinary lives, from people who are much more ambitious, like Janka from Hungary, who wants to develop an economic model to help us understand the economy, for Christ's sake. Like this is, I'm like, how did you even come up with that? They were all in their own ways thinking whether I chose, whether I couldn't, or whether I still don't know. There are other parts of my life that need attention, and I'm going to spend energy on them. And that propelled me further with my book because it made me incredibly grateful to see that even within the choice, the uncertainty or the grief, there was a space for motivation, for wanting, for eagerness, hunger for life. And I was very happy to see that, because that didn't match the lives that I was being told that we were living. Everything I had heard or seen about women without children was negative. And I thought, none of these women are have awful lives. Even if they went through experiences that are not positive, they are finding ways to overcome them and go beyond them. And that was incredibly important for me to stop feeling scared.
Yeah. Yeah. That's That is a big one. It comes back to that representation, right? Of like, can we see examples? Can we like find other people? Can we like have these conversations? It's also reminding me of, I just saw here in the US, there was a Pew Research study that came out a few weeks ago that asked
Yeah.
people without kids. It had some really good data in it, but one of the things I thought was interesting is that for people who said they didn't have kids, part of why they said that they either didn't have them or didn't plan to have them was that they wanted more time for hobbies and passions and
Yes.
family and friends, that aren't kids. And I think this was one of the big shifts for me uh, that helped me in my deepest grief was I think like when you have kids, so much of your resources, like your time and your energy and your money and all of these things have to go into your kids because they just that's what they require by the nature of parenting. To be like a good parent, you really have to invest so much into your kids. And um that's kind of what I was wanting to do, right? Like I was looking at motherhood, like that's where I want to be investing those things. But then kind of opening up, once I realized I couldn't have kids, opening up this idea of, okay, so I'm not spending all of those resources there, but I still have all those things. I still have time and, energy and all these things. Like, where do I want to invest them? Like my
Yes.
relational energy, all of those things. And it was such a better way for me to kind of think about it, is like, wow, I still have all this stuff that I can invest where I want to. And it's not all channeled into this like one thing. I get to choose like where I want to put it. And that was a nice reframe for me. So it's fun for
Yeah,
me to see other people how, where they're putting it too.
the same research mentioned how many people were excited about the opportunity to spend that money in their own lives when they are older, because that was making them feel less anxious, less fearful about growing old without children. And I thought this is such a great perspective, because it is true. What you would spend on sending your kids to college or supporting them in a myriad of ways, that money can now be spent on your own life. And that will it's very likely to be something that could help you have a more comfortable older age. So for everything, like one of the questions I ask at the back of the book, you will have some of the questions that I asked them in the interviews, and it goes from who are you and what does your life look like? Did you choose this or did it happen to you? And then I go into how do you spend your time and your energy and your money? And it was very interesting to hear the awareness of, I know there is nobody there for me in the same way that we expect. To be honest, we don't know if the child will be able to take care of us. We've seen this happen. I live in another country. My mom is growing old in Brazil. I do what I can, but I'm not there.
Yeah.
Right. So, um, but there was this awareness of, well, if I don't have a child, I better take care of myself. I better come up with a plan B. And that awareness is so important.
Yeah.
It's painful to see, but it's also logical, right? And I was very happy to see the different ways in which they're investing on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left with Nicole, and I haven't seen any questions come through in the question box yet. But if you have a question, feel free to put that in. I'm going to look through the chat and just see. I think there's so many of you responded. I won't be able to get through all of them, but just curious to see what people said. So someone said, yes, they have family that they talk to about it. Someone else said, yes, they talk to their friends, but not family. Um, Someone else said they can speak to their significant other about 80 to 90% of the time about childlessness, but in their current community, absolutely no one else I can feel comfortable that I can feel uncomfortably vulnerable at times. And these are really hard discussions too. I think especially if you're childless and there's grief around it too, they can be really uncomfortable and bring up that vulnerability for sure. See, someone else said that they didn't have anyone to talk to before this group. Donna, I'm glad that you're here. Um, Someone else said, no one in my inner circle or immediate family is child free or childless. Even my current partner has an adult daughter, so we can't relate, and it's been hard. Someone else said, I have many friends in my, oops, sorry, my screen just bounced. Where did it go?
I have many friends in my life who don't have children, as I'm in my 60s and I'm gay. Growing up, I was unusual as I wanted children. However, I have realized that I have never had conversations with my friends around their life without children. I'm slowly, gradually speaking to them now. I'm very glad that's the case, Leslie.
Yeah. Someone else said they have both child-free and friends and family, and childless family and friends. Unfortunately, in the past, I've not been able to speak to them too much about it when I needed to. After being a part of the Childless Collective, I'm grateful to have a sisterhood of women who I can speak to and relate to. It's allowed me to open up to family and friends that I've not spoken to about it in the past. That's great. I have noticed too, a lot of people I've heard say that they, even if they know people in their lives who are child-free or childless and they try to broach the conversation with them, they don't always want to discuss it. Like there have been some people I know who have been kind of confused. Like, I don't know why, like I've tried to talk to them about it. They don't want to talk to me about it. So I think they are hard conversations to have. And sometimes it is easier if you're in some kind of a group that is, made for having these discussions, like these kind of forums and having these places where we can kind of come together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry, we don't have time to get through all the comments, but I appreciate everybody who shared. Thank you so much. I will read through all of them, but it's really interesting to hear everyone's experience. So thank you for sharing that in the chat. Okay, so we have had a couple of questions come in. Okay, so someone said I have the book on pre-order because again, it's not out in the US. I told you I actually got around it by using a VPN to get the audiobook. And I actually purchased it on Kindle, or not Kindle. I purchased like an ebook and I purchased an audiobook. So I have two versions of it, and I used a VPN to get around the the restrictions because it is out in the UK but not the US. So but
Not
someone said
yet, not yet.
not yet, November.
Yeah.
So someone has pre-ordered the book, so they haven't read it yet. But this person asked, did being single impact ambivalence that came up in the interviews or any other aspect of not having kids?
It being single impacted. Yes. One of the women, Nanette, she's British. She's now in her early 70s. It's been a while since I interviewed Nanette. She's a nurse and she is a full-time elderly carer. And when I interviewed her, so her story is of being a childless not by choice, but there is choice in the sense, that's how she explained it to me. She couldn't find a partner who was good enough, she said, and to put up with shit. She would prefer to be alone. So she was like, if I have, so it's like, I don't want to lower my bar. So there were people, and she could have become a mother from the perspective of having a partner, right? She thinks she's fertile. She has no reason to think that she wasn't. But it was just not finding a person with whom she could settle, or finding people she didn't think were good enough. And then, so in that sense, her ambivalence was more, I probably would have had a child if I had found a guy, but because I didn't, and I don't really know how I feel about that. So she wasn't particularly sad or particularly happy or proud. There were no, like, there was no one emotion that she was telling me. She was saying just, this is what happened to me. I had 3 or 4 different boyfriends, didn't work out the way I wanted. One wanted to get married, but he was a bit of an idiot. I didn't want to marry him. So, and she was actually using those words. It was like, yeah, he wasn't good. He was an idiot. So I didn't marry him. And that's the life I have. I go to work and I have friends. We're both male and female. I travel a lot and I try not to make my life about being single or not single. This is just what happened. So she was very much not sorrowful at all about being single, but she did say sometimes I do sit and I go to bed and I think what would it be like if I had a partner here next to me. It's just a life that she never had access to.
Well, I think that's like what was so nice about reading through the stories that you shared of the people you interviewed, but also, you know, that I experienced in having conversations with so many different people who don't have kids, is that it is so unique and individual, right? Because there's like what we share is that we don't have kids, and then everything else is not shared. Like we can have
Yes,
similarities, but it's like you can have there's no like groupthink, right? Like you could talk to five different people who are single and childless and hear five different experiences of
yes.
what that means for them and how they processed it and what grief has looked like or not looked like. And it's just so fascinating and just so grateful to you for putting this together and putting this work out there as a way of like collecting some of these stories and like you said, showing that we're not just one thing. We're each individuals, and even if we share like maybe on the surface a demographic or like a something about us that sounds similar on the surface, we can have those shared experiences or identities, but there's so much that is unique in each of our stories, and it's so nice to have this collection that brings the different stories together.
I'm so glad. And thank you, Martha, for pre-ordering the book. I appreciate.
And before we wrap up, I'll look for all the links I think in your link tree you have a whole bunch of different links to where to pre-order, where to buy it if you are in a country where it is available. But somebody asked how would someone access the curated collection that you put together of the books and media and like podcasts you said that you put together? Is that on your website?
I know it's not anymore. I for the
Okay.
longest time I have this blog in Portuguese. I had it for the longest time, but then it was just too expensive to keep all the links and all the hostings and all the things. I quit my job to finish this book. It was like almost 2 years without any income, just trying to get
Mm.
this thing out. So at the time, it's like, why am I paying this thing? If there was like hundreds of images of books and movies and art pieces. It was costing me a lot to keep that up. So if you are not on social media, unfortunately, it's a little bit hard to access it. But look, I am available via email. You can always go to my link tree. Just type Nicole Louie. You'll find my link tree. There is a contact form there. You can send me a message and just ask me directly what would help you the most. Is it like your top 5 movies that you like the most? Like just ask me what you want to know, and then I will do my best to just send you the names and the links of some of them anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And I am just putting your link tree. Okay,
Yeah,
so I
that's
just
all
put the
that's all
link
you need.
tree. It's in the chat. So if you go to Nicole's link tree, she has information about how you can either order her book if you're in a country where it's already available, how you can pre-order it if you're in the US, um, or you do what I did and get a VPN and sneak
Evacuate.
it so that you can be prepared for your interview.
Yeah, it's
Um,
coming. It's coming in North America in November, so it's in the US and Canada, but everywhere else you can find already. But again, I'm very open. Say hello to me on social media if you need help with anything. Otherwise, just send me an email and I will. It might take me just a little bit of time because I'm in the middle of a promotion thing, but I will reply to you. I promise.
yes, thank you, Nicole. And let me see where we're at with time. We have 4 minutes. We had one other question come in. So somebody said, I'm 71, no children, enough money to live in a retirement home if I need to, but even then, you need some sense of family. People who will care what's happening to you. I have no idea how to meet other women or couples without children. Any thoughts on how to meet people? I'm a member of the Childless Collective, but there's no members in my community, which is a fairly large university town. I know they're here, but how to connect?
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for sharing. And meetup groups, I don't know if you heard of a website called Meetup, probably www.meetup.com. I would be surprised if they don't have something at least close enough to where you live, because they have meetups everywhere, most places, or more of online connections if there is nothing nearby. You can type the name of your town there and just see what appears in terms of events and also groups. This is how I found quite a few people from very small towns in Scandinavia to places in India. Just like sometimes it will be a child-free group in a small town, other times it would be a feminist group or a group of women or women above 50s who want to meet for coffee. There are all of those random ways to meet people. So that would be a good way. Another thing I know Judy Day is focusing more on growing old without children. So maybe check what Jody's up to now if she has some websites that or links or events or anything that she can help you with, because I know she's focusing on plus 50 women and how they're growing old. And for the UK, there is also an organization called, is it Growing Old Without Children? I would be very happy to share those links if there is a way I can connect you with. But maybe just type Growing Old Without Children and see if that organization comes out. And I know they have a resources page that can take you to a way to meet more people, and hopefully you will.
Lori, you're always on it. Just wrote aging well without children.
Thank you
So,
so
and Jane,
much.
thank you both. So aging well without children.
So they have
Um,
Facebook groups and you can contact them and see. It's more UK based, but
yeah,
you never know. You could make a new friend with whom you can have a call. And so some things are
yeah.
geo and other things are more thematic. I think with Meetup, you will be more likely to find people near you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that I still struggle with this one of like, how do you meet people in your own community? Because in most communities, there's not going to be a local group that says it's for childless or child-free women. But I think, like you said, finding like groups that maybe are focused on other things, but where other people will be who are part of your cohort or share interests with you. Hopefully, you can eventually make some connections. It can be really challenging though. So I know we
Yes.
just have like 1 minute left here. How can people, well, I put your link tree in. I'm going to add that one more time so that people can go to it because that has all the links that you need for everything that Nicole's doing. But what did I miss? Any closing words, Nicole?
Oh, I am just astounded by the number of people who were here. I wasn't expecting to be over 50 people. I so appreciate you spending 1 hour of your Sunday listening to a stranger. Thank you so very much. This is incredibly generous. If you are interested in reading the 14 stories, well, 15, because I also tell my own story in the book. This book is this beautiful, colorful. Thank you. I'm very proud of this one. It is already in the UK. It can be shipped anywhere in Europe, also to Asia, and it's launching with the second publisher on November 5th in North America. So that just means that if you want to buy it, you pre-order, but then you only get the envelope in November. If you can find the link, it's hard to copy, whatever is the situation. You can just type my name, Nicole Louie, and you will find my links. There is another woman who is a very smart woman who writes books about maths. That's not me. So you can also buy her books, but that's not me. I'm the other one who writes about not having kids. So yeah, thank you so much for spending this time here. I appreciate and I wish you all my very best.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for your time and for putting together this amazing book and for sharing more of your thoughts with us here today. And then I know we talked about having you back later this year once the book is out in the US to have a follow-up conversation and give people some time to read it. So we'll have Nicole back in a few months. But thank you to everybody who joined us again on this Sunday live. It's so nice. I love having these where we have the live chats. It's just so nice knowing that you're there and getting to hear from you as well when we have these conversations.
Yeah,
So
it's
thank
been
you all for
lovely.
being here. And yeah, thank you, Nicole. It's so great to talk
Thank
with
you
you.
so much. Thank you for making space for the conversation, for the work that you do. And I never had a Zoom call with hearts before, so that's also something
So many
really new.
hearts. There's so much
So
love coming at you. So
I appreciate you all and I appreciate every single thing you do, Katie. Thank you so much.
thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.